Welcome, everyone. We are in the midst of our fall series of our Working Wednesday webinars, which are our professional skill building webinars. We talk about skills that are important in the workplace and how students are already practicing these skills in school. So with me today, I have two fabulous guests, and I'd love for each of you to introduce yourselves, talk about where you work, what your role is at that work. And Jose, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Sure. Pleasure to be here. My name is Jose Da Silva, and I'm the principal of Springfield High School. I've been working in this capacity for the past 9 years. I have 25 plus years in education. I have worked at all levels. I have worked at private, high school, local high school as well. And in a nutshell, that's a little bit of my world in education. Would love to be able to get into some of these specifics at some other time if the opportunity presents itself. And been involved with 4J as well. But most of my tenure in education has actually been at a private, local high school. But 2 more years and I'll be I'll have spent most of my time in education here at Springfield High School.
That's great.
I consider that to be the, I don't know if there are any 4J folks in the audience, but I truly consider this to be the better side of the river.
Throwing down the gauntlet.
Yes, right at the beginning. I love it. That's great. So it sounds like you have so much experience that you'll be able to talk about these skills and how students are already practicing them at schools. That's great. Bess, do you want to go ahead and go?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Bess Jamie. I'm the Director of Education at United Way of Lane County. And United Way is a nonprofit organization that's really focused on ensuring kids are successful in school and life. And we do that by helping to raise money from community members and then investing it in other nonprofits and agencies around Lane County that help families stay healthy and attached, to support kids showing up for kindergarten, sort of ready to roll, to help improve 3rd grade reading and to help youth, high school, middle and high school youth find a path to success, like through a career, through college, through whatever way that makes them happy, and just be an active member of society. So we work in a lot of different realms. A big part of my work is as the director of our state-funded regional early learning hub. And so I really work a lot with families and kids ages 0 to 6 before they even hit school. And that work is really around coordinating services between other community agencies and partners to make sure everybody's kind of working together, because we don't want to duplicate or replicate services when somebody else is already doing them. So I get to work with parents, of young kids, and community partners and folks in the schools as well.
That's great. Thank you both for doing such important work. That's really great. All right, so today we are going to start off by talking about empathy. So how do each of you use empathy in your daily job? Jose, do you want to start this one off for us?
Sure. I would like to start by saying that I truly believe that it's very important to rely on the fundamentals of leading by example. Super important, especially since we've been in this pandemic. I think that the way we are experiencing the world right now is super heavy, and we're super thin on time. And so we ought to be looking at the world from a different lens. Very important to acknowledge that. And then I think that the way I try to lead by example in that we can never make any assumption, especially now that a particular task is easy, to be accomplished. Always the idea of assuming best intentions. And then I think that whatever may have been easy in 2019, pre-pandemic, or before the pandemic hit us, because we're still in and out pre-pandemic, they're not the same. I mean, we have all been affected, adversely affected so greatly. That's really, really important. So as long as you have this overall, agreed upon understanding, the members of the community understand, that we have to come from a place of be able to assume best intentions. I think it's a good way to show, empathy toward all members of your community. And I was talking about, the concept of an easy task, back in 2019, it's not the same, anymore. So I think it's we have to be more cognizant of feelings than the task itself. As long as there's this mutually agreed and understanding, I think that it's a great place to start to demonstrate empathy.
I think that was really great. And I love that you brought in the pandemic, because I think it has affected all aspects of our life. So thank you for that. Bess?
Yeah, that is excellent words of advice from Jose. And I will also say that I think, empathy is really being able to see the world from someone else's perspective, sort of stepping into their shoes for a minute and trying to understand how it feels to be them. And so when I think about the work that I do, both with parents and families, and also with the team of people that I manage, I manage 6 people. So I have sort of an external empathy focus and an internal empathy focus on my team, making sure they're doing okay. I think the number one thing that I try to do more than anything else is, it's sort of a 2-part. Part 1 is just having a sense of curiosity. And with that, a really well-developed ability to listen, because there's a lot that goes into assumptions that get made about people, especially just from the surface. And if you don't explore those assumptions and really listen to how people are feeling and what their experience has been, you really can't see the world from their lens or from their angle. This has been, I think, really true for not just during the pandemic, but with a lot of the racial justice issues that have come to a head with the George Floyd murder and a lot of the unrest that stemmed after that in the summer of 2020. And some of the work that we're trying to do in schools and with families around, really trying to have empathy and understanding for those that are different from us. So that listening and that curiosity about, tell me more about your experience. Can you share with me what that felt like? Can you give me an example of how that's shown up for you in your life, is all ways to really develop empathy. And I use that every day in my job when I'm talking to stressed out families and stressed out team members, to really understand where they're coming from so that I can help step in and say, okay, given all that, what do you need from me to help support you? Or what can we do as United Way or the Early Learning Hub to help lower a barrier to accessing services? Or there's just a lot of different ways that shows up. But for me, it always starts with listening.
That's great. I love that you both talked about assumptions, but in slightly different ways. Jose, that you talked about just making sure that you're thinking about things with the best, like you think everyone is trying their best, which is so great. And then Bess, using that curiosity to really explore where people are coming from. I think those are really valuable ways of looking at empathy. Oops, excuse me. My questions are right behind this. Jose, how have you seen students demonstrate empathy in schools?
I've seen them demonstrate that in how their behavior, affect the larger community. Whenever we have the opportunity to correct a particular behavior, we always come from a place of a restorative practice, restorative conversations, again, assuming best intentions. And when you give them the opportunity to reflect on how their behavior affect the larger community, and what can we put in place to prevent that from happening in the future, it has produced a great deal of results. So going back to what Bess shared earlier, walking in each other's shoes, and restorative conversations. The basis of that is for folks involved in that to be able to speak their truth, and the other person or the people in the room being able to listen, that perspective, where that person is coming from and how it affected everything else around them. And then again, I think that's something that we have been developing over the years, but we are now at a point that is really part of the fabric of what we do. And then I highly recommend that. And I think that can transcend it into different sectors, as well.
That's great. And then Bess, from your experience, do you think that the examples that Jose just gave translate into the professional world?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about how to take what we hear from people and translate that into better customer service, or, a better way of creating a space where employees feel welcome and included and where they belong, you have to have that space for there to be the assumption of good intent, and for those sort of restorative practices to take place. If you have an employer that doesn't want to know anything about their employees or their customers or the people that they're trying to serve, and isn't going into any conversation with any assumption of good intent or curiosity, they're just closing the door on really doing their job well. So we constantly have to ask ourselves, like, what else aren't we hearing? Who else aren't we hearing from? Do we have a diverse set of voices that are informing this work? And that all speaks to kind of what Jose was saying around these practices that have to come into place that build that connection between students and the broader community, or employees to the broader community. And as a leader, as a team leader, my job is to help teach my team how to do that and facilitate that, and create opportunities to do that, just like Jose's job is to do that with students. So I think there's a lot of overlap with what happens. And it's if you can get started with that practice early in high school, middle school, and you're working in a classroom and with your peers, that only translates really nicely to what a prospective employer would be looking for as well. That kind of emotional intelligence is something I'm listening for in every interview with somebody that I hire. I want to know that they know how to do that, or at least have the basic skills to do that, because it can be hard to teach. So I think the earlier that you can learn that and practice that, the more ready you show up to the workforce.
Absolutely. So speaking about being able to practice this and learn this, it's not typically something that's always taught in a classroom. So is there a space either in your high school, Jose, or in a high school that you've been in, or middle school, where students can really learn this skill without, I know you talked about the restorative practices, but is there any kind of clubs, extracurricular activities that students can get involved in where they could really dig in and practice this?
Yeah, absolutely. We are now launching an initiative here called No Place for Hate. And this is being done in partnership with the Anti-Defamation League, Northwest, where a group of students are receiving training from them, to initiate a school-wide campaign, a school-wide project where, literally the focus is to make sure that there is no place for hate in our school. That's the name is very fitting. So we're, like I said, we're launching, this as we speak. But some other areas that we also have demonstrated that outside of our school is a campaign here initiated by our student leadership which is Let's Be Good Neighbors campaign. This has to do with how our behavior affect the community outside Springfield High School, how it affects our neighbors. And this, was a result of actually a complaint from a local store, because from time to time I check in with them just to see how our students are behaving, because upperclassmen, they have off-campus privileges, and then they walk to those stores during lunchtime. And in one particular instance, the feedback I received was not positive. So I promptly went out there during lunchtime and did lunch supervision at this local store. And then they made sure that I conveyed the message to our students, how that reflects on us, on them, on us, and in their families, as well. So there's this, renewed commitment now to make sure that we follow the protocol, that they have in place, and then we respond to corrections in a respectful, manner. A civil dialogue is a big focus, of our restorative practices here at our school. In the parking lot as well, the way they drive, not only around our neighborhood, but also anywhere else. You need to constantly be, attentive to that. How loudly they play their music in the student parking lot. So this Let's Be Good Neighbors, campaign is all about extending what we try to do on campus out in the larger, community. And then also the recognition that we are super understaffed. We haven't been able to, fill positions that became vacant as a result of the vaccination mandate. We are now at a point where we were able to fill the 3 teaching positions, that became vacant as a result of that. But we have quite a few support, staff positions, opened. So they are aware of that because this is part of our daily announcements. We do have advisory periods here every day for 20 minutes built into the schedule. And all students are placed, even the ones who may have an off period, they are assigned an advisory, class. And the intent of advisory is to really build on all the different aspects of what we do outside of the content that brings community together, that makes them aware of the opportunities that they have, to be of a support, especially in the areas. One area that I can share with you is we're super understaffed in the food service, area. I'll speak a little bit about that later, but so they have to do their part. Not only they have to do their part, some of the kids who might have an off period right after, lunch, they stay to support, our custodian, the only custodian that we have during the day, with some of those cleanup, duties. Yeah, lots of different ways to show empathy outside of our campus.
That's great. What I'm hearing from both of you when you're talking is really about being a good community member. And I think that's just a really great thing for everyone to practice. Sometimes adults need to relearn this lesson too. So any adults listening, remind your friends. We all want to lead by example. But something about this, like how can you convey this skill on a resume or in an interview? Because this is one of those emotional skills that's a little softer. And Bess, you kind of mentioned this, that you listen for this in an interview. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that and how you can get across that you do practice empathy and that you are a good community member.
Yeah, thank you for that really good question. And I will say that they talk about sort of, communication and emotional intelligence, being a good teammate as like the soft skills. And I would argue they are not soft at all. They are fundamental to being a good employee, a good community member, a good neighbor. And it can be hard. You really have to, I think, to be truly an empathetic person, examine your own self and ask yourself, hard questions. And I love the example that Jose gave about the students staying after and helping the custodian, or, folks in the food service, because that is true empathy. They're recognizing that there's a need here. It's a really probably pretty easy and light lift for that student just to give a little bit more extra effort to help, recognizing that the school staff may need just a little bit more assistance. So I would say in terms of it showing up in a resume or an interview, if I'm looking at a resume, especially for somebody just coming out of high school that doesn't have a deep or wide work experience, I would love to see volunteer activities, community activities that they've been involved in. I'd like to see on their list of skills, active listening or self-study in things around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a signal to me that they're interested in bettering the human condition, that they're interested in hearing and learning other people's experiences, even if it's very different than their own. And when I'm interviewing people, I often start with a scenario like, so tell me what you would do in this situation if you were leading a group and somebody was really disrespectful to another person in the group. How would you handle that as the group facilitator? And what I'm listening for is someone that can be respectful in a tricky situation, that doesn't let someone be hurt by another member of the group, but does some gentle interruption of that behavior, and knows how to course correct. And so if you can show that you've done some good thinking about that, about just like, how can I be a bystander that might interrupt a racism or some type of bullying behavior, those are skills that employers are looking for, because that's the sort of social fabric in which workers have to show up every day. So if you're part of supporting trans students in your school community, like, I want to know that shows me that you've done some work, or that you're part of Black Lives Matter, or you're working on being a language interpreter for a Spanish speaking family because you grew up speaking Spanish, like in whatever way that might show up in your life. I would say put that on your resume. That's really good information for employers. And the skills that are harder to teach are those, versus like, let me show you how to run this program, or how to program this computer. Like, that I can teach you. These are the harder things to teach. And so I'm looking for that sort of already developed and practiced in a future employee.
Great.
May I add to that really briefly?
Absolutely.
As you were sharing that, Bess, I was thinking of, first off, I really wanted to say that I completely agree with you that such skills should not be referred as soft skills. I think they should be referred to as essential skills, something along those lines. And I can see students being able to elaborate on that on their cover letter. So one of the things that we have going here is not only a resume building, workshops, if you will, for them to be able to, put something together, even if they don't realize they have such a skill, something that they have done here around campus. I will tell you that our Black Student Union last year, they were pivotal in helping create some of the advisory lessons that I was alluding to. before, not only to level the level of awareness, but also to help folks to build skills in and around allyship, how to become an ally. And then we were able to team up with them and create scenarios. You're talking about scenarios, Bess. I love scenarios where, how would you interrupt, such a behavior, if you found yourself in this situation. Super powerful, put that on a cover letter, right? And expand on it. And then I think that would be a difference maker, because especially at this point in time, when you're talking about, even adults might not realize that, but especially, high school students who are already working, or some of them who might be going straight into the workforce, to be able to distinguish themselves by expanding on such a concept on a cover letter.
That's great. I love that idea of talking about those specific things. If you don't put them on your resume, or even if you do, but being able to talk about those coherently on your cover letter is a really great way to show, because that is the first thing that an employer will look at, is what are they saying about themselves in the cover letter. That's a great plan. All right, we are going to change topics a little bit, and we are going to talk about adaptability. So how important is adaptability in your current role? Bess, do you want to take this one on first?
Sure. I would say that the pandemic and the recent wildfires and the social justice movement that's really had a spark lighted underneath it these past 2 years is talk about adaptability. We're a nonprofit organization, and when the pandemic hit, we had a set of plans that we were working off of that got totally tossed out the window. And we had to scramble to think about, okay, what does the community need now? Well, people are out of work. People are scared to leave their house and get food. People don't, may not be able to get their medications, or it was a whole new world was unfurling in front of us, and we had to adapt so quickly that it sort of took my breath away. But in the course of about 3 weeks, we started a community fund that people could donate to for pandemic relief. We had set up this fund. We collected over $600,000 in donations from the community, and then turned it around to get grants out to agencies that were serving families in need. So basic needs services with food and clothing and medication and housing to help cover what was going on in that moment. And I use that as an example only because that is life. I mean, stuff is going to come up all the time, whether you work at, McDonald's or 7-Eleven or Apple or Google, or, you're putting together, the Amazon, boxes in the Amazon warehouse. There's always things that are going to come up in which you have to be flexible and nimble in your response, and just go to where the need is. And I will say that I think that is what sets good employees apart from great employees, is that adaptability and flexibility. Because if I have someone that says to me, I see this thing is happening, or we're hearing this thing is happening, where do you need to be? Where can I go? I can let go of that thing I was doing and turn in a different direction. I'm happy to do that. If they can remain less fixed on what their expectations are and go to where the need is, that's worth its weight in gold. And those are the people that I really want to go forward with, because we've got, you just can never predict things that are going to come your way. And so having that spirit and mindset of openness and adaptability is, it's huge. And employers really look for that.
Okay, I will add to that, all of that you said, Bess, and I'll just go over a couple of things that come to mind, when school shut down. The whole concept of a job description that bullet that says other duties as assigned, that got taken to a whole new level, to the point that we had to amend union contracts, because that was no longer valid. So the school shut down. Next thing we know, and there were no textbooks, right, for us to get to guide us on how to do everything virtually. And we had to, this is a school of 1,400 students. When you look at the size of the classrooms, 6 feet apart, right, social distance at that time, in order to make that happen, we had to divide the student body into 2 groups, a morning group, afternoon group, then figured out transportation, making sure that they didn't cross paths, so contact tracing would, be manageable. And then plus what platform we're going to use to deliver, instruction, all of that. And we could no longer grade, the same way, because connectivity for some families was an issue, right? And we could not grade on turning assignments on time because there was no such a thing for some of our families. So all of that had to be taken into consideration. And so the ability to be adaptable has become more important than ever before, And then I think, going back to leading by example, the only thing that I haven't done since the vaccination mandate, when we lost, some of our colleagues, is to drive a school bus. Did we lose Bez? Did we lose her? I think we may have lost her. I think she might have to log back on, right? Yeah. So should I continue?
Yeah, I'll pause it for now, if you don't mind.
No.
Okay. Hopefully you remember where you were.
Yeah, no, I think I do. I think I was transitioning into what has transpired in terms of adaptability and leading by example. So, others can see that. Is that since some of the positions became vacant because of the vaccination mandate that I was alluding to, earlier, some positions are still unfilled, as I also mentioned. And the only position that I don't think I've done so far is to drive a bus, because I don't have my CDL license. I've done everything else, from coming in at 6:30 in the morning to help prep for breakfast and lunch because we are understaffed in the kitchen, to subbing, in my 25 years, I was a classroom teacher, I was a counselor, I was dean of students, and several administrative roles, as well. So I found myself back in the classroom, subbing for, I was the most consistent sub for a period of 2 weeks until we were able to fill, a position. So that goes to show, that whole concept of taking the bullet point, other duties as assigned, being taken to a whole new level. It's just, that's how important adaptability is, especially these days.
Absolutely. And I think that students really were able to practice that skill too during the pandemic. I have 2 young kids, and my daughter was going into kindergarten. And so her first experience with school was a computer and online instead of being in the classroom, which I think is a very different experience. So I think our students do have a lot of practice with that, especially during the pandemic. But is there anything in terms of the classroom setting that you really see students practicing adaptability, and besides obviously the pandemic, that's huge, but any other times that they're needing to do that?
All the time. Is the current 9th grade class, they were in 7th grade when the school shut down. So that gradual, transition into developing the skills necessary to be successful in high school. They didn't have it, right? So we are having to practice that, little by little. The whole idea of having the systems in place, to reteach, some of the basics that have been long forgotten. And in some cases, a lot of students, and this is nationwide, are completely deregulated. We don't know some of the situations that they found themselves in by being, in lockdown. Some students, they use the opportunity to be in school as escape. They didn't have that opportunity. So some of the very basic skills, how to be on time, how to stay in class, we have had to build, breaks for a lot of students, because they went from we reduced the amount of standards, right? When we broke up into two different groups, a morning cohort and afternoon cohort. So we couldn't teach, all the standards. So we have to decide what were the most important standards that we're going to teach them, so we could, build on when we came back, to in-person learning. So there's all that gap of trying to fill them. So it is a constant, transition into becoming more adept, to doing in person in school, or doing school in person. And it has not been an easy task, and it's going to continue, to be that way, for a while.
Absolutely. So you talked a little bit about like classroom and pandemic, and are there other places that students can really practice that adaptability and really gain some skills around that besides in the classroom?
Yes. We have our College and Career Center, available. Hello, you're back. Good to see you, Bess.
So sorry, of course, in the middle of it, my internet just completely shut down. So we were talking about adaptability, and that's part of this.
Yes, it is. So we adapted we just continued on. We paused and then continued on. And we'll have you jump in after Jose to talk about that a little bit more.
Thanks, and my apologies.
Yeah. And I was talking about our College and Career Center, right? Where students have the opportunity to work alongside a lot of college students from the University of Oregon, who are supporting their efforts in terms of essay writing for college purposes, or resume writing, or cover letter writing for those who are moving straight into the workforce. And they see the value that is placed on that, because they can actually get credit toward graduation for working, for volunteering. So there's that portion of what we offer here, but there's also a lot of social emotional opportunity for them as well, because we realize the impact of the pandemic and their social and emotional state. So we have more capacity now to provide services for that. We have therapists, partnerships through Lane County. Some of the essential partners that can actually provide those services on campus, are right here. So it's really reassuring to be able to look at the areas that have been most impacted, that we need to provide support, that they can actually take advantage, of that. And then I'll tell you, and the need is so great right now that if Lane County created outside of what's already being offered here, and then unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to support everybody. There's some folks on the waiting list, But if Lane County outside mental health were to Monday through Friday were to offer, you know, sessions for our student body right here, it would fill all those spots with our students alone. Right? So that's a level of need. So to offset that, we do a lot of trauma-informed practices, education with our teachers. We do a lot of social emotional workshops, as well. So they are, aware of how some of the challenges that our students face will affect learning in the classroom, because we just don't have enough, capacity to provide that. So we have to educate ourselves on how to integrate that into teaching.
Thank you for that, Jose. There is a huge need. You're right, absolutely, for a lot of services for a lot of people right now. Bess, do you want to talk a little bit about adaptability and in your work and why it's important, and what you've seen in terms of, you can talk, I want to also talk about resume and cover letter. If you want to bring that in now, you can, or we can do that next.
Sure. Yeah. Adaptability is something that we try to put in our job descriptions as like, hey, this is a job that may have a high degree of ambiguity. Like you just may not know from day to day what the priorities are going to be. So you need to be somebody that's okay with that. And not everybody is. And that's okay too. It's more finding that the job that's going to fit your personal comfort level with that. So if you know going in, you're not somebody that can really that really appreciates a great deal of change or uncertainty, you might think about doing something else that's a little bit more predictable or standardized, because some in human services, especially, certainly teaching, and many other sectors in which people are working with people, there's a lot of adaptability that has to take place there, because you just never know. You're working with humans, and so there's a lot of change and a lot of unpredictability that comes with that. So I think just knowing yourself is a really good place to start. And then if you do see that on a job description of, hey, this requires, a mindset or like a demeanor of flexibility, or being okay with doing different things on different days and maybe not knowing. Really, I think speaking to that in an interview of saying like, I'm good, I'm really comfortable with that idea. I am a go with the flow kind of person. I like to plug in where I'm needed. I'll check in with you to see if this is something I can be helpful with. And that is music to employers' ears, because they know that that's somebody that's not going to get overwhelmed with the idea of like something changes that they can't quite adapt and move forward. So in my work with families and with community partners that are serving families, we're always asking like, well, how can we be helpful in this situation? Something that's going on that students might not be aware of right now is, in addition to staffing shortages in schools, there's huge staffing shortages in childcare. So maybe if there's a teacher that wants to work but has children and can't get childcare for themselves, they can't work because of that. So that's a place that I'm having to do a lot of conversations with partners, like, okay, how do we get more childcare providers into the workforce, and what does that look like? And what needs to happen there? And so it, again, like that wasn't an issue that I was working on, before the pandemic. There was plenty of childcare providers, but it's that willingness to kind of go where the work leads you. And even if you're, working in a position, in high school, straight out of high school, straight out of college, that's more in the service industry. I worked fast food. I waited tables. I bartended. I did all kinds of service industry jobs. I was a housekeeper in a hotel. I sold ads in my campus newspaper. Like I did a million things as I was going through high school and college. It was always that willingness to kind of go where the need was that helped me grow in my career, because you just can't stay fixed in one place. And if you have a lot of discomfort around that, I think finding an industry that where there's a lot of predictability and less sort of human interaction, it will be probably more satisfying. So look within as well as what the job is.
I'm hopeful that a lot of people were able to do that during the pandemic. I think we all had different reactions to the shutdown, and from growing sourdough bread to eating way too much sourdough bread and pickling all sorts of things, or just needing to stay in bed for a while. I think we all kind of learned where our adaptability skills were, and where they might need to grow a little bit. So this sounds like it's pretty important I know it is important in the workplace. I use it on a daily basis. But how can you really get that across on your resume? Again, it's one of those essential skills that is important to be able to convey to employers. So I'm wondering, is this one that you might look for in a cover letter, or maybe you want to talk about in an interview? Where do each of you think that students could focus their energy with this one?
Yeah, I'll just say briefly that yes, put it in an interview. Like, I was able to respond to X by doing Y. I was able to help the company move from this place to this place when this happened. Any kind of concrete examples you can give of that will lend credence to your hireability, because you are someone that's adaptable. I think just stating adaptability as a strength or a skill that you have on your resume is absolutely excellent. I love seeing that. Adaptable is like one of the words I look for. And then, be prepared with a couple of examples when you head into an interview. More interviewers now are doing this, what's called the STAR method, and that's situation, tasks, action, and resolution. So they're going to say to you, okay, here's a scenario. Tell me how you would handle, or how you would have handled this. And so you have to think back and go, okay, in my work history or my volunteer history or in school, this is how I would have dealt with that. Here's the situation. Here's how I would have handled it. This is how I resolved it. And in telling that short story, you are showing your adaptability, your empathy, your willingness to be a team player, all of those things. So going into an interview with a few concrete examples of when that's shown up in your life doesn't matter, even if it's based in work. It could be at your church, it could be with a neighbor, it could be in your family, but just showing like, I have the emotional intelligence and experience to be able to demonstrate that to an employer through some kind of a situation example is really, really helpful, because it just gives that concrete illustration of what you would be like in a future situation. And that's kind of what the employer is listening for.
That's great. Jose, did you want to add anything to that before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think it's the notion of being aware and being able to expand by giving examples. I think it's extremely important. That's really gonna help set you apart. And a lot of times, we hear that this is one of the things I love about this job, is to be able to help students realize some of the skills that they already have that they don't realize. One example being for our bilingual students, 30% of our population, that's the largest ethnic population that we have here. They're Latinx students, and a lot of them are fully bilingual. They have put themselves in such leadership position when they go to a doctor's appointment with their parents who are not fluent in English, and they become the interpreters. That's an example. And it's okay. Let's list that, right? And so help them realize, such strong leadership, skills that they have, that they may not have been able to realize that that's important to put down on their resume, and be able to expand on that during an interview process. And then what we do to help them build that idea, build on that concept, I should say, is I always work with our staff here to help students realize that's not about what they will say during an interview of that they will do once they get the job. It's about them saying what they have already done, and be able to expand on that, and then how these gestures of us supporting a particular area that we might be understaffed, right? Yeah, you might not have the immediate monetary compensation, but this is of a great value, to you in getting to where you want to be. So it's helping them realize the true potential that they have while they're here, and how they can build on that. If all else fails, they can refer back to, if they can't think of anything, or they haven't had that experience, they can still expand on it by referring to one of the advisory lessons where, that resonated with them, and then how they would be able to use that as transferable understanding into the workplace. There's so many different ways that they can maximize their potential, but you really need to create that opportunity. That's why content, all the different subjects that we teach here are extremely important, but we also need to be able to build on the skills outside of the classroom that will help them get where they want to go.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for coming and joining me and talking about empathy and adaptability. I think you both did a really amazing job of making these things seem so concrete and gave such great examples of how students can show this on a resume, in an interview, on their cover letter. That was fantastic. Thank you everyone for tuning in, or if you're watching our recording, thank you for showing up. We have one more Wednesday webinar coming up on problem solving and collaboration. So join us next week for that. Thank you.
Thank you.